Welcome to the Bay Area Book Festival's Noir next to the bar. We normally count on you guys having a drink in your hand while you're doing this, but you're just going to have to pretend that you're already slightly buzzed, okay? Promise? My first request of you is, you know that cell phone that you leave off all the time and never get any texts and messages anyway? Would you kindly check to make sure that it's turned off? My name is Laurie King. I write as Laurie R. King. I will be your moderator for your evening's pleasure. I'm also going to be doing a short reading from a classic San Francisco noir writer, but I won't start with that. I would like to start by thanking all of our sponsors. Mystery Writers of America, the NorCal chapter, Norway House Foundation, the Norwegian Literature Abroad, NORLA, the Barbro Osher Prosuecia Foundation, the Consulate General of Sweden in San Francisco.
Holy moly.
I mean, we are a class act here, Gary.
You go to Sweden?
No,
You
great.
know it, man. I'd also like to thank Freight and Salvage for their generosity in sharing, and Green Apple Books, who will be sponsoring the signing in the lobby. I would mention, especially for those of you who are watching this online and streaming, that if there are books that you cannot get here, we recommend that you order them from our friends at bookshop.org. They may not be able to offer you signed books, but they will offer you many books. We probably are not going to have questions because this is a Noir at the Bar. We're happy to chat afterwards, especially if you plunk down some money for our books. So I am going to do introductions, and we are then going to do our readings, and each writer is going to be doing a brief introduction of their particular book. So we will start. We have, let's see, I forgot to organize you here. Camilla Sten, Tod Goldberg, Carin Gerhardsen, Thomas Enger, Cara Black, and Gary Phillips. So let me start and work our way back here. Gary Phillips. I love it when you write to Gary for an introduction. He says, Gary Phillips writes novels, short stories, comics, and occasionally enjoys cigars. However, I know that he's also known to play poker. He is a community activist, has written novels about P.I. Ivan Monk, showgirl Martha Cheney, and my favorite, Matthew Henson, the Black Arctic explorer who went with the Perry expedition. So there's
All right.
Gary at the end. Cara Black writes the best-selling Amy Leduc investigation series set in Paris, and the historical thriller 3 Hours in Paris, which was nominated for a Hammett. She lives in San Francisco with her husband, a former bookseller, and she likes killing people all over Paris. On the page.
Uh-oh. Dropped on mine.
Thomas Enger is a former journalist who made his author debut with the crime fiction novel Burned in 2010. The series about crime reporter Henning Yule is published in more than 30 countries, and recently he's added to that by co-authoring the Blix and Ram series and made a huge international success. Thomas has written 4 novels to date for the young adult novel audience as well, and he's a composer, so he can sing them for you. He lives in Oslo, Norway.
Thank you.
Camilla Sten is the internationally best-selling author of The Lost Village and The Resting Place. She also writes YA, but if you want to read that, you will need to work on your Swedish. Tod Goldberg is the New York Times best-selling author of over a dozen books, including The Low Desert, Gangster Stories, Gangsterland, and Living Dead Girl. He's a native of Walnut Creek. He lives in Palm Springs, where he directs the Low Residency MFA in Creative Writing and Writing for the Performing Arts at UC Riverside. And Carin Gerhardsen is a Swedish mathematician and former IT consultant. She made her literary debut in 1992 with a philosophical novel, but abandoned her writing in favor of a successful IT career. 15 years later, she decided to have one final go, this time with a best-selling series of crime novels. So, take it away, Chloe. So, you go ahead and start.
I go ahead.
Yeah.
Do I need a microphone, perhaps? Hello, everyone. I'm going to speak about my latest novel published in the US, and it's called Black Eyes. And the story takes place in 2 different time frames, 4 years apart, at the Swedish island of Gotland. I wrote the book from the perspectives of 4 different characters and how their lives and circumstances intersected. The conditions of a deserted, icy back road brings together a group of strangers with a force devastating enough to change their future forever. Okay, and I'm going to read it from 2 of the perspectives. We start with Sandra and then with Jan. Sandra. Finally, it was over. She lay on her side while he stood up so she could see him zip up his fly, button his trousers, and tighten his belt. The last thing he did before leaving was to lean over and kiss her on the mouth and both cheeks, softly and gently, as if he was thanking her for a lovely time, as if she were his woman and he had to go to work, as if he would soon be back. She heard him turn on music in the car and rev the engine, playful, happy. She heard him finally drive off, leaving her alone in silence broken only by the hum of the fridge going on and off close to her ear. She lay there. She couldn't bring herself to get up, even though there was a cold draft on the kitchen floor and she was half naked. She would catch cold. She managed to think that, but couldn't bring herself to think about anything other than snotty noses, coughs, and sore throats. Then she cried, quietly, without moving, for a long time, without forming any particular reason in her mind. She curled up with her arms around herself. Jan. He braked with restraint. He couldn't slam on the brakes. If he did, he would lose control of the car. He also couldn't swerve. He didn't want to be close to that ravine on the icy road, so it was a conscious choice to keep left on the corner. How was he supposed to predict an encounter on this quiet road in the middle of the forest? The oncoming car was going far too fast. He based his assessment on how fast it was approaching, and it was something he was unhappily unable to do anything about. He gently braked to mitigate the blow without spinning the car. Better to have a head-on crash than to be hit in the side by the oncoming car, he reasoned, or to fly into the abyss. But the idiot in the other car moved to the side and slammed on the brakes. He seemed to have the synapses of a reptile. So instead of the expected head-to-head collision, Jan watched with consternation as the oncoming car avoided him by a hair's breadth and, traveling sideways at high speed, slid across the road and practically flew off the edge. He also managed to see the way, what was it again? The way it plummeted down the slope rear first before it vanished behind the crest, and he had to concentrate on his own driving. He brought the Audi to a halt about 30 meters beyond the scene of the accident and caught his breath for a few seconds. Then he reversed back to where the other car had disappeared, turned off the music, and hopped over to the passenger seat for a better view. He wasn't sure whether to get out of the car or not. He was in shock and couldn't think straight. It looked bad. The other car had done a whole somersault before ending up at the bottom of the ravine with its nose facing the road. There was smoke coming from the car, but the engine was quiet. There was no movement inside, no signs of life from the driver or any passengers. And given how the wreckage looked, it would have surprised him if anyone had managed to survive the crash. So, what was he meant to do? Should he climb down into the ravine and see whether there was anything he or anyone else could do? In these slippery, cold conditions and with ordinary shoes in this rugged terrain? Hardly. Should he contact emergency services? Well, then the police would come. That wasn't a great idea. Even though Jan was sober, he would definitely test positive on a breathalyzer. Suspicion would be directed at him. That would generate an unpleasant ripple effect, and that would be most unfortunate. When all was said and done, that stupid driver had caused this and had only himself to blame. Someone else would have to find him and call an ambulance, if it was needed, which seemed rather unlikely given how things looked down there, how quiet and still things were. So Jan climbed into the driver's seat again and drove away. He used side roads to avoid meeting too much traffic. He drove calmly and carefully to avoid drawing attention to himself or risking anything else happening. And without music, the party atmosphere was well and truly gone. Just a few minutes after leaving the scene of the accident, his hands began to shake violently, then his arms. For the majority of the drive home, he was quaking. He was in some sort of shock, perhaps not medically, but it had hit him hard, and he didn't feel well. It could just as well have been him who had ended up over the edge, bleeding or stiffening or whatever the hell that road hog was doing right now. Before too long, it would be pitch dark, and the snow was coming down heavily. The car would soon be covered, and then there would be no chance of it being found until the snow melted, which would take at least a week, according to the latest forecast. So long as he didn't call emergency services anyway. But however he looked at it, he couldn't see how it would work for him personally. He couldn't call from his own phone. The call would be traced. There were no phone boxes these days, so that was out. And even if he borrowed a phone from someone, they would remember him and be able to give a description later. All calls to the emergency services were recorded, and if the recording ended up on TV, then about 400 people would call him because they recognized Jan's voice. Granted, it was unlikely that a call like this would end up as part of a TV appeal. But if the police had any sense, they would think it a bit odd that someone that had called anonymously to raise the alarm about what was meant to be a one-car accident. And then there was the other thing too, he thought, as he miraculously avoiding making mincemeat of a rabbit that had hopped into the path of his headlights. There was a minimal chance that that chick, whom he had almost forgotten in the rush of this more shocking incident, hadn't been completely on board, and that she might have contacted the fuzz, or at least called a relative who might have done it for her. She would be able to claim that Jan had drunk a load of booze and that he had left her at this or that time and had passed the scene of the accident at the exact same bloody time as the accident happened. That wouldn't look at all good to the police. He had to admit he had been a shade intemperate this afternoon, having put himself at risk of being charged with no fewer than 3 fairly serious crimes. In the eyes of the law, of course, not his own. The first was no crime at all, just a bit of mutual fun. And the second was no crime either, just an accident, given that Jan was driving with so much care and hadn't been affected by the small amount of alcohol he had drunk. The other madman had been driving too fast and had made bad choices on a treacherous road. What really bothered him was that the crime he had not committed in relation to the accident by the ravine suddenly became a crime simply because he didn't want to stick around to see the results of the whole mess. It made him so angry that now that he came to think about it, he thumped his fists on the wheel, sending shockwaves all the way up to his elbow.
So Tod Goldberg.
Please don't hold your applause.
Not on my account. Uh-oh. They cut you off, baby.
Trying to stop the Jews.
A little button at the bottom. This one?
Is there another one that works?
Do you want
Yeah,
this one?
Yeah, this one works.
You hand that to me. I'll pass it on.
Oh, this one works. Oh, we got this one.
All right.
Hello. Oh, that's nice. Hey, everybody. What a beautiful day, wasn't it? What a nice day to see everyone's faces again. 2 years of sitting around in your home. And now you get to come to the greatest ABBA concert ever. Gary and I had no idea we'd be joining ABBA tonight.
That's right.
It is so nice to be here in Berkeley. I grew up in Walnut Creek, so it's fun to be back in my city by the Bay AA with my old friends Gary and Cara and my new friends here tonight. I'm going to read a little bit from my book, The Low Desert, which came out in 2021. It's out in paperback now. The story I'm going to read from is a story called The Royal Californian. And all you really need to know about it is I write about bad people doing stupid shit to each other. And this is about a page into it. Now, here's the important thing. If you are of a gentle constitution, I want to tell you that this story was picked for Best American Mystery Stories. So even though you're repulsed by everything that I say, the American public has already judged this worthy. Your opinion means nothing to me. You're all dead to me. And also, for those of you who get fidgety, if you have restless legs, this will take about 7 minutes. I get restless legs. It's 2009, and Shane's working the Black Angus in Northridge. They've got something they call the Fun Bar, a relic from the disco years. Lit up floor, big dark booths, great sound system, but no one dancing. Just frat boys over from the college drinking vodka and cranberry like they all have UTIs. At first, he's just doing karaoke like anybody does karaoke. Stands up there and lets some drunk come up and sing American Pie. Helps him out when he realizes the song is 8 fucking minutes long and he doesn't have the wind. Flirts with the bartender. Maybe gets a hand job in the dry storage. Woman, man, he doesn't give a fuck. Hand job was a hand job. Shane, equal opportunity back then because of all the coke and a profound lack of giving a fuck. Love is love. Friction is friction. Maybe a little guilt now, thinking about it. Thinking about how he did his wife Rachel wrong. Staring at the ceiling fan, chilling in his room at the Royal Californian. 11 p.m., still 100 degrees outside. Giant flying roaches committing suicide against his window every couple minutes. Shane dying for a fucking Percocet. 1 million of them still in Gold Mike's van. Shane could hit himself for being so stupid, not thinking all this through. His foot throbbing, sweat sticking to sticking his shirt to his chest. It's his own fault. Rachel, that is. A lot of lying. Fuck it had been his point of view back when he worked at the Angus. Go home with $100 for the night, an empty load. Fuck it. Problem was, he kept that point of view long into his relationship with Rachel, and she was not a fuck it kind of person. So he pretended it was just how performers were. Though by the time Rachel came along, he wasn't a performer anymore. Baby, he'd tell her, you just gotta say fuck it when you're in this business. Otherwise, every night would crush your spirit. And Rachel, she'd say, then you should get another way to earn a living. And so he had. Kind of. Thing was, Shane could really sing. All this other shit was ephemeral. His talent, man, that was in his genetic code. His dad played in the Catskills back in the day, singing cover bands. Even came out to California that one time, brought Shane with him, doing that at Melvin's in Palm Springs. Typically, Dad would come back home the first week of September with a roll of cash, and for a month, Everything would be good between him and Shane's mom. Dinner's out, new clothes, Shane's mom falling in love all over again, talking about how maybe this year they'd get married. Maybe she'd go to college, then maybe law school. Shane's mother always talking about how she was going to be a lawyer. But by the time she died, she'd spent 25 years as the lunch lady at Rensselaer Point Elementary down in Troy. She'd had Shane when she was 15, dead by 51. Got diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's and put a fucking noose around her neck 2 hours later. Shane's dad saying, maybe she didn't really have the old timers because wouldn't she have forgotten? His dad was still alive. That was the irony. Doing what Shane thought of as the Dead Man's Tour. Buddy Holly and Elvis tribute shows at Indian casinos in Connecticut. Shane keeping track of him on the internet. That fucker doing pretty well. But the Angus. In comes Gold Mike. Sits at a table right by Shane's kit. Nurses a Diet Coke. Really gets into it when Shane sings, tapping his foot, bobbing his head. When Shane hits his full register during Come On Eileen, Gold Mike stands up and whoops. When he goes on break, 15 minutes later, Gold Mike follows him outside, where Shane is having a smoke and watching the traffic on Corbin Avenue. You got a nice presence, Gold Mike says. Thanks, man, Shane says. Wasting it out here, if you want my opinion, Gold Mike says. Oh, I'm just waiting to be discovered. Well, that's not ever going to happen, Gold Mike says, like he knows. He's maybe 27, but he's one of those guys who talks like he's been around the world 50 times. Shane's seen Gold Mike on the circuit. Weber's in Reseda, Sagebrush Cantina out in Calabasas, Shutters in Santa Monica. Gold Mike fingers a diamond-encrusted V that hangs around his neck. Shane counts 25 little diamonds. Whatever, Shane says. He takes one more drag from his cigarette, then puts it out on the bottom of his shoe, like it's a thing he does all the time, which it isn't. Whatever, Gold Mike says. I insult you and you say, whatever? Passivity, man. That's an illness. You want me to hit you or something? Gold Mike laughs hard. He's one of those Armenian dudes who shaves his head just to look tough. Shane making out the outline of a full head of stubble. Shane isn't much of a fighter, but he's the kind of person who will stab a guy, put a screwdriver in someone's eye. You're either a pussy or you're not. Shane probably is one, but he's not squeamish around blood, and that helps. I like you, Gold Mike says. You a child molester or anything? What kind of fucking question is that? I've been watching you, Gold Mike says. You put your dick in anything. Just need to be clear what I don't get down with. How long have you been watching me? Couple weeks, Gold Mike says, like it's perfectly normal. You ever do any time? You ever do any time? Couple days here and there, Gold Mike says. That must impress some people. Gold Mike laughs, but doesn't respond. What's the V stand for? Shane points at Gold Mike's neck. My last name is Vosky, Gold Mike says. Okay. It means gold in Armenian. That's lucky, Shane thinks. Then says, you speak Armenian? Because there's no way Gold Mike wasn't born in Reseda. Fuck no, Gold Mike says. It's a dead language. He points over his shoulder. I went to CSUN, and everyone always wanted me to join the Armenian Student Association. Bunch of assholes named Gabarian talking about the genocide. Not my game. I'm multinational. Speak Spanish, French, got a little Russian. Enough I could probably get by at Odessa. You ever been there? The OG Russian restaurant in Vegas? No, Shane said. I don't get down with Russians. Not since Fiddler on the Roof. Gold Mike raised his eyebrows in mild amusement. Shane didn't make him for a fan of musical theater, but then he said, what's your last name? Solomon, Shane says. That means something? Peace, Shane says. Yeah? That's what my mom told me, he says. It's from the Hebrew word shalom. You speak Hebrew? Enough to DJ a bar mitzvah. Gold Mike leans forward, motions Shane to lean in too. You want to make some real money, Shalom? Thank you.
There we go. Okay, so I'm Camilla. They told us to pick something that was funny, sexy, or suspenseful for this, and I am not as funny as Todd, and I can't write sex scenes because my mom would read them, so I tried to pick something suspenseful. I'll be reading from my latest book in English, The Resting Place. It is a thriller about a woman with prosopagnosia, or clinical face blindness, who sees her grandmother getting murdered, but can't identify the killer. So the scene I've picked takes place. Thank you. You'd never guess where I found it. It was Reddit. Yeah. After her grandmother has been murdered, during the will reading, they discover that she had an old mansion in the countryside that my main character, Eleanor, had never heard of. And so in order for the inheritance to be handed out, they have to go out there and set a value to it. So this takes place at the abandoned mansion in the middle of a snowstorm, because I'm a sucker for horror tropes. When Eleanor is chasing her aunt, who is drunk and hysterical, out into the snowstorm, wearing nothing but a pair of boots and her grandmother's 60-year-old silk dress. That seemed appropriately noir. I point my flashlight at the ground, see the heavy tracks in the freshly fallen snow, and start following them through the driving storm down toward the lake. My breaths are heavy and rattle in my throat, and the snow that has landed and melted on my calves has started to dribble down into my boots, chilling my feet even more. The dress is so narrow I can barely run, and even when I try, I keep stumbling on the slippery ice beneath the fresh snow. The second time I stumble, I feel one of the seams in the skirt give way, but at this point, it's a relief. At least now I can move a little more freely. "Veronica!" I scream into the belting wind. "Veronica, come back!" She could be anywhere by now. The hand holding my flashlight is so cold it's starting to turn into a numb claw. I switch hands and shove the frozen one back into my pocket, well aware that in just a few minutes the other will feel exactly the same. How long does it take for frostbite to set in? It's just me out here, and Veronica, lost in the storm, all alone. The pathetic little beam from my flashlight is enough to light up Veronica's tracks, but it also blinds me to my surroundings. All I see around me is darkness. I have no idea how far I am from the house or the forest, or how close I am to the lake. All I can see are tracks in the snow. All I can hear is the wind in the trees, hear it tossing the thick trunks to and fro. I can feel it too, feel it tearing and pulling at my body, trying to fling me around. My face is so numb I can't feel my lips anymore. When I moisten them with my tongue, they feel cold as ice. I don't know if I'm crying or if it's snow that's melted on my cheeks. "Veronica!" I scream again. The night is pressing down on me from every side. My numb face feels like a mask against my skull. My heart is pounding in my chest, and I'm right back in the dumbwaiter, back outside the house. My eyes fixed on the shadow by the lake, back outside the door to Vivian's apartment before a faceless figure who shoves past me without a word. Without a sound. Just before I hear Vivian's rattling breaths, I pick up the smell of sweat and blood and mortal dread. Those rattling breaths like the wind between the treetops. Is that snow or blood I smell? It isn't real. It isn't real. I have to anchor myself, remind myself where I am, root myself in the now, not disappear into a memory. But in this now, I'm lost in a blizzard, my aunt has disappeared into the night, and my lawyer has frozen to death. And yes, I do hear something now, something that isn't the wind or the rustle of branches or my own breaths or my skittering heart, but that sounds like footsteps. Not Veronica's heavy, drunken gait, quick, light steps, running. "Veronica," I say, quiet now. Not a call or a question, a prayer. I raise the flashlight and swing the light around me wildly, trying to catch something, anything, but it just bounces off the dense flurry of snowflakes around me, enveloping me, concealing me, and blinding me at the same time. I whisper, "Vivian." The word has passed my lips before I even realize I'm saying it. I don't want to be here. I want to be at home in the warmth. I want my grandmother to be here. I want Vivian to be tucking me up in bed, to brusquely pull the cover all the way up to my chin and then stroke my hair, unexpectedly gently, to kiss me on the forehead and then rub away the lipstick mark with her thumb. I sob once, my whole body shaking. I don't dare move because then the shadow might take me. Any step I take could be leading me straight into its arms. But I can't stay here either. I have to move even though I can't, because if I stay here, I'm going to freeze to death. I'll freeze right here and die, all for a fear of a shadow that might only exist in my head. Go on, Victoria. Get a move on. Can't stand around dilly-dallying all day. Vivian's voice is touchy and irritated in my head, and it immediately makes me straighten my back. That's better. Now, steady hands, steady mind. Keep your hands still so you can see your footprints. The woman stomps around like an oafish longshoreman, so they shouldn't be too hard to find. Pick up the pace. Come on. Chop, chop. I point the light at the tracks. The snow is whirling, but the wind prevents it from settling, so I can still see Veronica's footprints. I start to run, or try. My whole body screams and resists, and now I'm longing for that numb feeling, because when the blood starts coursing through my body again, my frozen nerve endings come back to life, stinging and burning like someone's doused me in gas and lit a match. But I keep on running in her tracks. And then all of a sudden, I'm down by the lake, and for a second my heart stops when I think the footprints are going to continue out onto the ice and disappear into the depths. But then I turn my head. At first, I can hardly see the dark bundle on the ground. A thin layer of snow has already started to cover her, and she melts into the surrounding darkness. But the blackness of her coat is swept out over the stones on the lakeshore, and her ebony hair lies draped over a single, outstretched, pale arm. Veronica. I cry and I run over to her, dropping my phone in the process. I kneel down beside her and roll her onto her back. The hood of my jacket has fallen back, and the wind is whipping my hair around my face as I touch her cheeks with fingers frozen stiff. She's so cold, I think she's dead. She lies pale and still under my unfeeling fingertips. I'm vaguely aware of my teeth chattering, of myself sweeping her hair off her face and saying her name again and again without any hope of a response. I fumblingly run my fingertips to the side of her neck, as inwardly I see blood gushing out, a gaping wound in the neck that isn't hers, dark, wide eyes searching for mine, gasping red lips that aren't getting any air. But I blink, and I try, and that image dissolves, and all that's left is Veronica, still and almost beautiful in death, and she breathes. It's faint, very faint, but I put my hand to her chest and feel it moving up and down, the most beautiful movement. I look at the back of her head, at the big gash in her part, at the hair that has clumped into a caked-in mass of cloying blood. She didn't fall. There was someone there. There's someone who's still out here, and we are still all alone in the flurry of snow. Thank you.
Thomas?
Shall I continue? Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Thomas from Norway. I'm going to be reading from a book that I've co-written with another Norwegian author called Jørn Horst. This is how it looks like. This is the third book in a series starring the police officer Alexander Blix and his news blogger sidekick Emma Ramm, who's half his age, approximately. In this novel, Blix's closest colleague, is found shot and killed execution style after she has discovered a link between several suspicious deaths in Oslo. And what's worse for Blix is that his own daughter is renting a room in that officer's flat. She barely escapes the killer, also becoming a key witness to the crime. In this very short chapter that I'm going to be reading from, she has been taken. The droplet of water that fell from the ceiling landed in the exact same place as the last. The spot, less than a meter from where she was sitting, with her back pressed up against the wall, was slowly growing, the damp spreading across the floor. Iselin swallowed. She was alive, but knew that it was only a matter of time until she wasn't. Yet, she also knew that in the end, the man who had accepted the job couldn't go through with it. She had heard of that happening to hunters. They could be decked out in their kit, guns locked and loaded, but once the animal comes into range, they can't bring themselves to pull the trigger. They'd touched on it in one of the modules for the Police University College's firearms training course. Humans had an inherent resistance to taking the life of another living being. The first time soldiers serving in a war zone have to actually shoot at someone, 85% of them deliberately aim to miss. The next time is different. Still bound at the ankles, she pulled her legs up to her chest. Even with the cable ties keeping her wrists together, she was able to slide her arms around her knees, hugging them in tight. She tried to retain her warmth by making herself as small as possible. There was a draught coming from further inside the dark building, an open window or a hole in the roof somewhere. The air was heavy with the overwhelming stench of solvents and tobacco. One of her captors smoked. The sound of a plane flying overhead made her lift her gaze to the ceiling. It wasn't the first time she'd heard one. It sounded like it was ascending, as if it had only just taken off. She sat and listened to see if she could hear any more, soon realizing they were passing over constantly. Wherever they were keeping her couldn't be far from Oslo Gardermoen airport, meaning she wasn't far from Oslo either, she reasoned, far from her father, the police. A door slammed somewhere down the hall. Not long after, she heard voices, but she couldn't quite catch what they were saying. Her chest constricted. The men exchanged a couple more words. She managed to pick out a few, something along the lines of completing the job. The cable ties were starting to slice into the skin of her wrists. It couldn't be long before they bled. You can sort this out yourself. I'm out of here. The driver. You can't leave now, the other voice retaliated. You're just as involved in this as I am. Timo. Or at least that's what the driver had called him. He was the one with the gun. But he wasn't the same man she'd fought with at Kovik's. That man had been shorter, stockier, his build more dense. Flashbacks from the fight rose to the forefront of her mind. She could hear the man's panting as he held her down, smell his body, his cologne, see his dark eyes boring into hers. That calculating gaze behind the balaclava. She wanted to shake the memory out of her head, but a sudden wave of realization crashed over her. The revelation made her gasp, made her eyes shoot wide open. She knew who he was, but couldn't understand why or how. I need to tell Dad, she thought, looking down at the cable ties, preventing her making any attempt to escape. Iselin knew they were difficult to get off, but not impossible. I'm going to leave you with, since that was such a short chapter, I'm going to leave you with something that I discovered at the beginning of the book. Someone saying that, hang on, there it was. This book is fraught with tension, packed with nerve-wracking moments that keep you completely on edge. Unhinged has one of those jaw-dropping, what did you just do kind of conclusions that will leave fans of the series reeling, with flawless translation that brings the story to life in such vivid tones. It's a book that really leaves a mark, and one that would take some time to forget. It's on sale back there.
So, Cara.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. And all I can say is Guten Tag. No, that's wrong. Good Tag. Okay, that's the limit of my Swedish. It's not even Swedish. Okay. Thank you so much. I'm going to read something from Murder at the Porte de Versailles, which came out. It is the 20th in my Amy Leduc investigation series set in the different arrondissements of Paris. And I'm basically just going to say that it's November 2001. In the wake of 9/11, and Paris is living in a state of fear, as much of the world. And there's constant bomb alerts, and there's high ethnic tension. For Amy Leduc, November is bittersweet because it's the anniversary, of her father's death and her daughter's 3rd birthday. And they fall on the same day. So at the birthday party for family and friends, it's disrupted when Boris Viard, her very good friend, leaves to go get Chloe, her daughter's birthday gift. He's left on his desk at work, and he works at the bomb police laboratory. He doesn't return. And I'm just going to pick right up. As you said, we have to start right in with the action, where Amy is going to find out what happened, and she's with her partner, René Friant. More sober now, René turned on his police scanner, a birthday gift from Amy, and fiddled with the frequencies while Amy focused on navigating the rain-slick streets among late-night buses, taxis, and darting bicyclists. Outside the car window, wavelets crested with foam from passing blue-lit bateau mouche. She clenched the steering wheel as she drove by Notre Dame and the inky wash of the Seine, past Saint-Michel's spotlit fountain. She cut through Saint-Germain, nerves jangling. She shifted into 3rd up Rue de Vaugirard, Paris's longest street leading to the Porte de Versailles. Along the dark expanse of the Jardin du Luxembourg, its fence tipped by gold. She strained to hear the cackling scanner. No more explosions so far. Skirting Montparnasse, they entered the 15th arrondissement, its population the size of Bordeaux's, the 2nd largest in Paris. A real pain to drive through at night. Once it had been the villages of Grenelle and Vaugirard. Amy knew it well. From the 70s quayside high-rises near the former Citroën factory site to the working-class neighborhoods, laced by narrow lanes and sporting views of the Tour Eiffel, to one of her favorite street markets on Rue Saint-Charles, where she got Miles Davis's horse meat, her dog. Residential, quiet, and boring on the surface. But another side lay beneath the fabric of the 15e. What are they saying, René? Rain pattered on the car's roof. Rue de Danzig, explosions, 1 casualty. Only 1 casualty? Did that mean Boris had survived? Had he been there at all? Tense, she burned with the need to find whoever had his phone. René fiddled with the scanner dial, getting more static. 2 blocks later, she took another sharp turn until Rue Brancion and sped by Parc Georges Brassens, wreathed in a dark mist of shadowy trees. The Art Nouveau wrought iron fence roof of the old abattoir loomed in matte shadows. The wipers scraped the fine drizzle beating the windshield. At the corner, flashing red lights pierced the night. Car alarms sounded in whooping wails along the street. Mon Dieu, René said, a catch in his voice. I don't like this. Her shoulders tightened. She downshifted, made it to Rue de Danzig in 2 minutes. Diamond-like splintered glass carpeted the rain-pelted road. It crunched like gravel under their tires. Firemen steered residents from the apartments across the street to safety, while a few bystanders huddled on the pavement. A wrench in Amy's gut plunged her back in time to the Place Vendôme explosion, to the moment her life had changed. Amy, watch out! René grabbed the steering wheel with a jolt and turned the car to narrowly avoid a policeman. The car stalled with a shudder. You almost hit him, Amy. Shaking, she restarted the car, took the steering wheel and shifted into park. She had to get a grip, concentrate on Boris. Alert now, she powered down the window. Can't you see the streets closed? The angry fleet motioned for her to turn. Up Rue de Danzig, she saw the flashing lights of an ambulance. Turn around or I'll have you towed. She showed her fake police ID, her father's old identification. which she doctored with the latest stamps. I was called here by the crime scene manager. Move the barricades, she said, mustering a false bravado. Renee pinched her leg. He hated when she did this. The fleek leaned in the window, his blue anorak dotted with rain. No one told me. The police scanner crackled as if in answer to her prayers. Amy caught a name, Toureau. Was it the same Toureau who'd been a Brigade Criminelle detective? Take it up with Toureau, she said, knowing she had to move fast before the fleek checked. Renee's S-Class Mercedes, booty from the son of the ex-president of France, now in prison, still had government plates. It's crucial. I see the victim before the ambulance departs. A fire truck pulled alongside her, the firemen shouting for him to move the barricade. Then the fleek was waving them both through. Renee tugged his goatee, something he did when nervous. They'll throw us in jail. Not before we find Boris, she said. A charcoal cloud of dust hung in the drizzle above the bio lab. The building had been sliced in half, exposing offices and laboratories to the sky. Concrete rubble and iron beams spilled onto the parking lot. All of it looked like a bombed-out war site. Ahead she saw a gurney with a white body bag beaded with drizzle. Her heart fell. She slammed on the brake, stalled the car. Helpless, she felt helpless, unable to face the fact that the body bag might contain Boris. The man who'd hugged her daughter just hours earlier, who'd left the birthday party to come here for her present. Why had she thought she could do this? Renee switched off the ignition and cast her a long look. He put a warm hand on her knee. Stay here. He buttoned his trench coat, popped a mint, and got out. Apprehensive, she watched Renee, speaking to the firemen, gesturing. Waiting, seeing the destruction ahead, she couldn't help but remember Boris's office, full of his prized orchids, his pride and joy. Then it clicked. Boris's office wing was under renovation. He'd been temporarily located to the building next door to the lab. He couldn't have been in the lab. He would have gone to his temporary office, possibly dropped his phone in the confusion. Praying that was it, Amy looped her scarf over her head, hopped out of the car, and ran in the cold drizzle toward the crowd. This area is off limits. Public's not allowed, one of the demeanors said. Move on, it's unsafe. Amy wouldn't back down. Couldn't. She had to find Boris. Who's in charge here? This is an active crime scene. There could be other explosives. You need to get behind the barricades. Hold on. Who are you? Asked a distinctive gravel-tinged voice, the one she remembered from Boris's phone. She turned. A lean 40-ish man in a rain-dotted anorak showed her his police badge. BRI, the Brigade de Recherche et de l'Intervention, responding to heavy-duty incidents. He gestured her toward the front of the barricade. Bonsoir, I'm Monsieur Boris Viard's friend, she said, knowing time was of the essence. Aimé Leduc, are you in charge? For now, Dennis Toureau. Up close, she recognized him. She also remembered his reputation. Less than stellar. The rancid odor of burnt plastic and whetstone mingled with the crowd's fug of wool overcoats. Start searching, Toureau, she said. You need to find Boris. He was here. Toureau exchanged a look with the bomb squad and the director. He motioned Amy forward and let her pass the barricade. His eyes flickered alert. His attitude had changed. When? Maybe 30 minutes ago. More. Frantic, she rummaged in her trench coat pocket, papers, keys, her phone. For the photo in her wallet, Chloe in Boris's arms, taken at the anniversary party. She lifted it up for the demineurs and all to see. Have any of you seen him? A shaking of heads. What are you waiting for? You found his phone. Find him. Toureau exchanged a look with the demineurs, a look that sent a shudder down her neck. Get the dogs, said Toureau.
Gary.
I'm going to read a quick passage here from the new book, which is called One Shot Harry. It's set in Los Angeles in '63, a kind of pivotal time period in the city. Restrictive housing covenants are still on the books, and the police chief of Los Angeles, William Parker, the infamous William Parker, is actively recruiting white officers from the Jim Crow South. And Harry is a crime photographer and part-time process server, so he has a tendency to piss people off on both sides of the law. Ingram felt elated, having achieved a minor victory in his confrontation with the cop. He took a bus back to his apartment and made a double-decker sandwich for his late lunch, early dinner. He then went back out, this time with a specific destination in mind. He stepped inside the Lucky Clover Tavern on Broadway. The bar was originally built here as a location, was a terminus for the yellow car trolley. Unlike the red car, which served the interurban area, the yellow car operated inside the city with downtown the center. There were a few trolleys still in operation, but the transportation department had announced those two would be mothballed by year's end. The name of the watering hole was straightforward, but as freeways came to dominate and define Southern California, patterns which had begun crisscrossing the. Let me start over again here. Here we go. All right. The name of the watering hole was straightforward. But as the freeways that came to dominate and define Southern California, patrons who'd been coming to the bar for years routinely called it the cloverleaf, as in the crisscrossing patterns of the region's many elevated freeways. Sam Cooke's Twisting the Night Away was playing on the jukebox as Ingram sat on a stool at the bar. People laughed and conversed. Ingram liked the place. The atmosphere was inviting, as a neighborhood joint should be. Haven't seen you in a while, Harry, the barman, Clyde Hampton, said. He was a barrel-chested man with salt and pepper hair. Hampton wiped down the bar with a flourish. You been on the wagon? Not hardly. Give me a beer. No, make that a rum and coke. Been that kind of a day? Damn right. Cuba Libre coming right up. Soon the barman returned with his drink, and Ingram drank slowly, realizing there was tension in his shoulders, a residue of his encounter with the cop today. There were black cops on the force, but why the hell was it the white ones were always seemed to be the ones he encountered? Surely, sitting there here in a bar with luck in its name, some of that had to rub off on him, didn't it? He sniffed, having more of his rum and coke, relaxing some. Hey, G.I., you lonely tonight? Ingram had been staring at a napkin with the bar's name on it. Now his head jerked up. Who said that? He glanced at men and women, couples who were sitting by themselves. Little Eva was singing Locomotion on the juke. But that woman's voice. He wheeled back around on his stool and chalked it up to his nerves. The welcome alcohol warmed his insides. He had more, already considering another round. I know you're cold out there. Ingram bolted off the stool, nearly knocking it over. Hey, man, a customer next to him blared. God damn, that was Soul City Sue, Ingram muttered. He wiped his wet tongue over his dry lips as he went in search of the voice that used to broadcast to tired soldiers on those bitter cold nights by the Nak-Tong River. He looked hard at various female faces, some of them staring back at the possessed man. But this was a black bar. Occasionally there might be a white or an Asian customer in here. It wasn't unheard of for the city department's clerks or typists to come over here with their coworkers. But there were no white faces in here tonight. And as he told Ben Kinslow, Ingram had seen a photo of the woman they'd call Soul City Sue. She had actually been a white woman from Arkansas. Though, what if those pics had been in the magazine had been more propaganda from the enemy? What if it was a trick by the Red Chinese, the backers of North Korea? They might have set the whole thing up, duping the press as part of their plan. Hadn't they perfected what they called brainwashing, using psychological methods to break the will, making a person do things they wouldn't normally do under their own steam? It wasn't so crazy to think the commies might have a reporter or two in their pocket. White bread-eating white Americans who'd been given the whammy, and even they didn't know they were under orders from Peking. Wasn't that the plot of that movie he and Strummer had seen last year? The Manchurian Candidate? POWs reconditioned to carry out deep-seated orders? Planted in their minds? There had been a scene where one of the GIs was ordered to strangle another captive. Ingram sat back down in a different position at the bar. He was aware eyes were on him, including Hampton's Be cool, he advised himself. Don't blow your top. If he next started seeing that child from the Charwar village walking up to him, they'd carry him off to the loony bin for sure. Everything okay, Harry? Hampton was there in front of him. Yeah, just winding down is all. He shook his glass, knocking the ice around. Give me another, would you? Coming up. On alert, Ingram was poised to hear Sue speak again, but there were no other words from her. Must be a screw loose in his addled brain. Was he under too much strain? Cobbling together a living chasing photos of people doing bad things to each other with the occasional process server job sprinkled in, always unwelcomed when he showed up bringing unwanted news. Maybe he ought to sell shoes or refrigerators, a job bringing smiles to faces. What had that guy Dietz said? If Harry hadn't happened along today, it might have gone way different with the police. Ingram nodded. That was something to hold on to. After finishing his second drink, ignoring the nervous glances of the other patrons, he paid his tab and left the Lucky Clover. On his way home, he hunched his sport coat around his shoulders against the cool of the evening. Soul City Sue didn't call to him from an alleyway or from a passing car. The ghost of a hungry and scared 9-year-old didn't materialize in front of him either. Even the cops left him alone. The weariness, more from the day's activities, had overcome him by the time he got inside his apartment. He sat in his favorite chair and fell asleep. Sometime past 3 in the morning, Ingram awoke. He pulled a bottle from his cupboard and poured a drink. He stripped down to his boxers and a shirt and stretched it on the bed, yawning. Try as he might, he couldn't get back to sleep. He turned on his portable GE transistor radio, the one item in his apartment purchased in this decade. He didn't find anything of interest on the AM band, so he switched over to FM. He turned the dial with the precision of a safecracker, its glow on his fixed features the only illumination in his bedroom. Ingram came upon a soothing woman's voice. She didn't remind him of Soul City Sue, therefore he didn't turn her off. This was on a station at the end of the dial with the call letters KPFK. It was run by a bunch of peace lovers and vegetarians. Ingram recalled, amused. The woman was talking about Eastern religion, in particular something called the chakras. Apparently there were 7 main ones in your body, invisible wheels of energy you could enliven with proper meditation techniques. It was all gibberish to Ingram, but as he lay there, sipping cheap whiskey, he did enjoy the music she started playing once she was done talking. It was from an album called Hypnotique by a man calling himself Corla Pandit. He was playing exotic music with a soulful resonance on a Hammond B3 organ, accompanied by on a few of the numbers by a guitarist. Ingram knew a secret about the so-called Pandit that Johnny Otis had told him once. Pandit was really a black man, John Red. Otis became black, and Red became the exotic other, both crossing a color line for their own reasons. He chuckled softly, floating along with the melody, not quite awake, but not asleep either. Whether he got in touch with one or more of his chakras, he couldn't say.
So is there a whiskey chakra, you think?
I hope so.
Since we have a few minutes, I'm going to read a selection from a novel by a woman named Lenore Glenn Offord, O-F-F-O-R-D. She was born in 1905 and lived most of her life in the Bay Area. She was friends with fellow Berkeley writer Anthony Boucher, whom some of you may know. If you know the mystery conference BoucherCon, that's named after Anthony Boucher. The two were among the founding members of the Northern California chapter of Mystery Writers of America in 1947, which means we've just had our 75th anniversary. So she's also, from my point of view, equally important, the first woman invited to become a Baker Street irregular. She won an Edgar for mystery criticism. I love the idea of having an Edgar for mystery criticism. I think now that you'd have 2 people who alternated the prize every other year. And this is from her first novel published 1938, Murder on Russian Hill. Now, the interesting thing about it is it talks about a lie detector test And it's set in Berkeley, and Berkeley was very interesting in its early use of forensic technology, such as lie detectors. So there were 3 officers waiting. Garrity said briefly, "Mrs. Hastings, may I present Sergeant Collins, Officer Latimer, Officer Jones." They bowed and all gazed at her with a polite sort of detachment as Garrity indicated where she was to sit. He sat down himself and rested his elbows on the arms of his hard wooden chair, folding his hands in front of him and looking her over seriously. "We've had several little talks, Mrs. Hastings," he began, "and I have received some valuable information from you. Have you anything more to tell me? Has anything come up in the last few days?" "Nothing," she said firmly. "There is one way you could prove that if you choose," Garrity said slowly. "Have you ever heard of the lie detector?" "Why, yes." "This department has used it a great deal. I believe it has been very useful in proving innocence as well as guilt." She thought for a moment that there was a gleam in his eye, but decided she must have been mistaken. "If you want to answer a few questions for us, Mrs. Hastings, and let the machine decide whether you are telling us the truth, it might be very satisfactory to you as well as to us." "I don't mind at all," said Coco, considerably intrigued. If the thing were any good at all, it couldn't make her out as a murderer. And if it weren't, there was nothing to fear anyway. "As a matter of fact, I'd rather like to see how it works." "Very well." The inspector got up briskly. "This is a purely voluntary proceeding on your part?" She nodded and started to rise also, but he motioned her to her seat again. "They will bring it in here." "Can you move it around?" she exclaimed, astonished. She had visualized something rather like the electric chair, a large, cumbersome instrument of torture. "You surely can. Isn't that right, Officer Latimer?" Latimer smiled in response. And then they fix it up. I'm not going to read you all that. "Your name is Carmen Hastings?" Latimer said quietly. "Yes," she said. He pushed one of the buttons. The third little arm made a tick on the paper. "Are you married?" "Yes." The red ink patterns continued to trace themselves without much variation. She decided suddenly to try a deliberate lie to find out if the machine could be caught napping. "You are 24 years old?" "No," she said boldly. The 2 little arms continued their regular wavering as Latimer pushed the no button. And Coco let out her breath, which she'd been unconsciously holding, thinking that the lie detector had not caught her. But at once, the respiration indicator slowed, traced quite a different design for half an inch, and then continued serenely in its usual pattern. Latimer looked up and grinned. He read his next question. "You live at 2980 Woods Street?" "Yes," she said, resigned. The thing was uncanny. It had marked down her lie with a dispassionate accuracy that was more terrifying than any cross-examination. He stopped the machine. "You see what happens? When you tell an untruth, your pulse and respiration change a little. Perhaps no observer could detect it from your outward appearance, but the machine knows." He took up another sheet of questions. A formidable list, Coco could see. She protested. Look here, Inspector, do I have to answer all of these with yes and no? Because that's awfully hard. I mean, generally, I have to qualify my statements." "Yes, I know," the inspector replied in a dry tone. "We'll try to phrase these questions so that you can answer them simply. You can explain at the end, if it's necessary." The lever was pushed again, and once more her heartbeats and breathing were written in red ink on a graph for anyone to read and interpret. She watched the recording, fascinated. Latimer said, "I want to ask a few questions about the morning of October 21st when Austin was murdered. Did you leave your home at the usual time?" "No, I was late." He pressed the button and said, "Plain yes or no, please." "You walked straight to your office from the Ferry Building?" "Yes." "You were not in Austin's apartment before 10 o'clock that morning?" "No." Garrett and the other 2 officers leaned, absorbed, over the table, watching the paper as it passed smoothly over its rollers. Their grim concentration made her breath come rather quickly. How would it feel, she wondered, if she really had committed a murder, and they were waiting until the machine should point its impersonal finger at her and indicate dumbly, "That is a lie, she is guilty." "You did not see Austin alive that morning?" "No." "When you entered the apartment, you did not touch the revolver?" "No." "Have you ever fired a gun?" Latimer queried unexpectedly. "No," she said without hesitation. Then a ridiculous memory popped up in her mind, and she added hastily, "Yes, I have, too." He looked at her severely, having already pressed the button for a negative answer. But she need not have corrected herself. The needles on the graph had taken a sudden jump upward. The questioning went on. "Did you kill Austin?" "No," Coco responded with great firmness, wishing that she could push the button herself and do it extra hard. "Do you know who killed him?" "No." "Do you suspect anyone in particular?" "No." "Your husband had no reason to kill Austin?" Oh, heavens, she thought, poor Bill is going to be dragged into this again. "No," she said. The answer was becoming monotonous, but to her annoyance, she saw that the record on the graph was not. It was calling her a liar again. Coco set her teeth. "You have told the truth about what you know?" "Yes." "You have not held back any vital information?" "No." "You are always on good terms with Austin?" "Yes." Latimer's eyes were at the very foot of the page of questions. There was only one more, but she might have known what it was going to be. "Are you hiding the real reason why you were leaving his employee?" "No," Coco said. It was a thumping lie if there ever was one, but for a moment, she thought she had got away with it. So Lenore Glenn Offord thanks you. And I would like to thank all my fellow readers up here. I would like to just run quickly down, and would each of you say what is the last book that is actually available here, and what is the next one that's coming out here, and when? So.
Mine is called Black Eyes. I don't know about the next one. Hopefully The Saint.
Mine is also called Black Eyes.
That's right. That's right.
My current book is called The Low Desert. My next book will be called The One I Turn In on or about August 31st, which will conclude my Gangsterland trilogy. It'll be called Gangsterland 3 or something like that.
The latest one that's available from me is The Resting Place that I was reading from, and the next one is currently called Work in Progress and is about half formed on my laptop.
Okay, yes, this is the latest novel that's on for sale. For sale. Back there, Unhinged is the title. The next one from me is going to be called The Book of Gallows.
This is the latest. Murder at the Porte de Versailles. Next year in March, we have Night Flight to Paris, set in 1942, occupied Paris.
The one out now is One Shot Harry, and I'm working on a kind of sequel to that, which will, who the hell knows what the title is, but it starts in the middle of the Watts riots in '65, and of course Harry is once again getting his ass kicked by the cops.
And Laurie?
My last one, I think the paperback for Castle Shade is about to come out, and I have a new series starting in September called Back to the Garden, where I got to revisit my hippie past.
Right.
So I would like to thank you all. I would like to thank the venue, and